All right, so number one, this is section 2.8. So let's look at this example. So find the distance. We're just going to do one problem. I asked you to look at it though. So find the distance between these 2 points. All right, so let's say we had 2, -3, and -1, -2. Let's make it -4. Sorry. -6. Put that -6. So 2, -3, and -1, -6. All right, so remember the distance formula is the square root of, and then all you do is subtract your x coordinates. So remember when we label these, we label this as x1, y1. It helps if you label it like this. And how will we label this one?
X2, Y2.
X2, Y2. And so the distance formula, and one of the videos, it explains how the distance formula comes about. So there's a reason why you subtract the x coordinates and the reason why you subtract the y coordinates and you square them. It's part of Pythagorean's theorem. Remember, you squared the legs, and that's equal to the hypotenuse squared. So all that's related. But basically, you're going to subtract the x coordinates. You're going to say x2 minus x1, and I square that. And it doesn't matter whether you put x2 first or x1 first. It does not matter. Because when you square a number, a real number that's not 0, what kind of number is this always going to be? Positive. Always positive. So it doesn't matter what you put first. And then you're going to add that to, and then you subtract the y coordinates, and you square it. So that's the distance formula. So you just got to know how to plug stuff into the distance formula. So again, it helps if you label them. So the distance between these 2 points will be the square root of, in parentheses, x2 is a -1, subtract x1, which is what? +2. And what do I do to this? Square it, plus, and then parentheses y2. And what's y2? -6, subtract y1, which is a -3 squared. Okay? All right, and then you simplify the radicand. So what's a -1 and a -2? In parentheses, -3 squared. And then remember, -6 subtracting -3. You have access to a calculator. Use your calculator if you don't remember this from several semesters ago. But when you subtract, you add the opposite. Remember? So it's -6 plus, remember you change subtraction to addition and you add the opposite. So it's -6 plus the opposite of a -3. And what's the opposite of -3? And you got to remember your sign rules though. So -6 plus 3 is a +3. But again, you could have just used your calculator. It would have given you +3. And I got to square that as well. All right, now remember, whenever you square these numbers, they better be what kind of numbers? Positive. So if you type in -3 squared in your calculator, you got a -9. That's not correct. It should be what kind of 9? Positive. So 9 plus 9 is square root of 18. Okay? So that's what we have so far. Now I think on the worksheet that deals with this, that you picked up last time, it also asks you to simplify these. So how would you simplify the square root of 18? Right, so you look for a perfect square that goes in an 18, and 9 is the largest. And so that's the square root of 9 times the square root of 2, and what's the square root of 9? So you get 3 square root of 2.
All right. Are we supposed to simplify or do we do it in decimal?
What does the directions say? Read the directions. And that's another thing. Some of you were not very happy with me because when you got your worksheet back, remember the one that said solve by completing the square? Some of you didn't read that. You solved by quadratic formula. I couldn't give you anything because you didn't follow directions. Is that clear? So remember, you have to follow directions. Whatever the direction says is what you do. All right, so.
If that's a -6 plus a 3, wouldn't that be a -3? Yeah.
What now?
If that's a -6 plus
You're right, -3. Yep. All right, so -3 right here, but it's still going to be what over here? Yeah, but you still want to put that because you know if you do that and I see it, you'll be upset with me, right? Because I'll take off, let's say, -1/4. But remember, these are worksheets, so I'm going to take things off to force you to make sure you see what you're doing wrong. But it has to be -3, but it's still 9. But you got to simplify. All right, now it's also going to ask you in some of these to approximate the distance. So use your calculator. So the distance is approximately equal to, and probably say 2 decimal places. But all you do, I would go back to this one here. Square root of 18, put the square root of 18 in your calculator. So remember how to get to the square root. So the square root button is right above the x squared right here. There's that blue. So you got to say second square root, looks like this. And you say 18, close parentheses, equal, and to 2 decimal places, that's 4.24. Remember, you got to round off to 2 decimal places. So this is that third digit, which is the thousandths place. So the thousandths place is 5 or bigger. What does that hundredths place become? It'd be 5, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But it's not, so it'll be 4.24. All right. So whatever units that is. All right. And then the other thing I asked you to do was the midpoint formula. So to find the midpoint of the segment joining let's say -1, 2, and -7, 5. Okay, so the midpoint is a halfway mark. So if you go back to those videos and just look at how that came about, basically the formula says, remember this is midpoint. Formula, now remember the midpoint is a point, right? It's a point. So basically if you look at, I'm drawing this by hand. Let's say this is -1, 2 right here, and -7, 5, let's say, is right here. So I look at the segment. So the midpoint is a point right in the middle, correct? That's your midpoint. But you have to understand the midpoint is also a point. And you label a point with an x coordinate and a y coordinate. So you'll see the midpoint is a ordered pair. An x coordinate and a what? Y coordinate. And to find the midpoint, remember this is your x's here and these are your y's. So to find the midpoint, you add the x's together. Don't confuse it with distance formula where you subtract the x. Yes?
What's the word after segment?
Joining.
Okay.
So you add the x's together. So x1 plus x2. And then the midpoint is the middle. So how do you find the middle of something? Divide by 2. And then the same thing for the y's. y1 plus y2 divided by 2. All right, and so basically you just plug these back into your formula. Now this is x1, this is y1, x2, y2. So the midpoint then would be -1 plus what?
7.
-7. Whatever that is, I divide by 2, comma. And how do I determine the y coordinate?
2.
Plus 5 divided by 2. And simplify this, so that's -8 divided by 2, comma, 7 divided by 2, right? Which I expect you to know that -8 divided by 2 is, yeah, don't leave it as -8 divided by 2. You need to know that that's -4. Now you can leave 7 halves, that's 7 halves though. All right, or you can write as a mixed number. As a mixed number, it will be what?
3.5.
3.5. All right. Okay, so that's that part of the worksheet I asked you to work on. Okay. All right. Now, let's look. Same section. This is still section 2.8, and it's not difficult what we're about to do. Okay, so right away, real quick, that 8.1.3 I haven't given to you, so I'm gonna have to print this out and give to you next class period, 8.1.3. That's something I've got to give you. All right, but remember, guys, if ever you're absent and you miss a worksheet, you got to print it, right? Because I do not want you turning in worksheet that's handwritten. I mean, I don't want you taking these, doing what I'm doing. I don't want you to take a worksheet where I printed it out and doing this. It's hard for me to grade. All right, so try and use the printout ones. Once in a while, I'll let you write it out, but that's not going to be every period. It's a case-by-case basis. Case-by-case basis. Okay, you ready for circles?
Yes. No. There's a lot.
Okay, so section 2.8 still, we're dealing with circles. All right, so first of all, you need to know the standard form for the equation of a circle. All right, so the standard form for the equation of a circle is this. It's x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. So that's the standard form for the equation of a circle. R stands for what? Radius. So HK is your center. So the center, so if this is a standard form, if you have an equation that looks like this, you can easily determine the center. The center is HK, and the radius is R. Oops. Radius is R. So the center is HK, and the radius is R. Now, another thing you got to remember is that it's got to look like this, x minus h squared plus y minus k squared. All right, so the easy kind would be this one. So find the center. Find the center and radius of each. All right, so find the center and radius of each. All right, so let's suppose we had x minus 2 squared plus y minus 4 squared equal 9. Right. So first of all, is it written in standard form?
Yeah.
Yes. So if it's written in standard form, you can determine the center and radius. What do you think the center of that circle is?
-2, +4.
Okay, so let's go back to this right here. The center is HK, right? Okay, so it's got to look like this: x minus, and then whatever h is, that's your h. Y minus, and then whatever k is, that's your y coordinate of your center. All right, so this right here is of that form, x minus h, right? Look, x minus h, y minus k. So now I'm going to ask you again, what do you think h is? 2. 2. It's got to look like x minus h. X minus 2. 2 is your h.
The point of 2 and 4 is our center.
Okay? 2 is your h. X minus h. H is what? 2. See, if you got to write it like this, you write it like this. X minus h. Y minus k. Do I have the subtraction already?
Yes.
So k is what? Circle it.
So you don't carry the negative.
No. Nope. That's why you got to remember what the equation of a circle looks like. All right, so your center is 2, 4. Now the radius, what do you think the radius is? 3. Because remember, r squared, you see this right here, r squared, right? This number is r squared. So 9 is r squared, correct?
Right.
And so to get r by itself, you take what of both sides?
Square root.
Square root. You learned about taking the square root property. Now, don't do the plus and minus. Don't do plus and minus because here you're talking about distance. Radius is a distance, correct? And distance is always what kind of number? Positive. So you won't see me do plus and minus here. So the radius is just what? 3. So the radius is 3. All right, now to graph it, and you're going to ask to graph it. So just watch this. So to graph these circles, the easiest thing to do is to do the center first. So the center is what here? 2, 4. So 2, 4. So here's the center, correct? And then from the center, the radius is 3, correct? So the best thing to do is to go 3 units to the right, 3 units up, 3 units to the left, 3 units down, and then connect a circle. All right, so 3 units to the right, 1, 2, 3, put a dot here. 3 units up, right here, correct? 3 units to the left, 1, 2, 3, and 3 units down. And then I do what to these dots? Connect them. Just do the best you can with a circle. Just do the best you can.
How did you come up with the figure 3?
How to come up with what now? You take the square root of this. So remember, to get the radius, all you do is take the square root of this number, right?
Yes.
Because that's what r squared equals. And to get r by itself, you take the square root of both sides. Okay. All right. So y'all okay with number 1 right here? Y'all know how to draw this. Drawing is easy. With the center, use the radius. Y'all agree with that, right? 3 right, up, down, left, and then connect a circle. Okay. Now the ones on the worksheet will be, the radius will be whole numbers, so you'll be able to easily, the dots will easily lie on a grid line. All right, let's look at this one. Number 2. X minus 3 squared plus y plus 2 squared equal 16. You have to know what the equation of a circle looks like in order to do this correctly. So the equation of a circle says x minus y minus. So here I see x minus, right?
Yes.
So h then is going to be what? 3. I don't see y minus here, but I do know from several semesters ago that 2 plus 3 is the same as 2 subtract a negative 3, correct? So what I'm saying here is that you may want to change this addition problem to subtraction. So in other words, y plus 2 is the same thing as saying y subtract a what? Negative 2. And so therefore y minus h, so therefore h is what? Negative 2. So you may want to rewrite the y plus or the x plus. Oh, I'm sorry, you're right, k. So you may want to rewrite the, if it says x plus or y plus, you may want to rewrite it as x minus or y minus. All right, so that part here, rewriting at y plus 2 as y minus negative 2, that's something you've had a while back. And it does make sense because y subtract negative 2 is what? Y plus 2. All right, so make sure you do something like this if you can't remember in your mind what to do visually. All right, so what's the center? 3 comma negative 2, and the radius would be the square root of 16, which is what? 4. And make sure you understand why I'm taking the square root of 16, because r squared equals what? 16, right? Isn't that what this says right here, that this is r squared? So what is that number on the other side then? But 16, correct? So r squared has to equal what? 16. And then on a previous worksheet, when you solved a radical equation, the square part was by itself, you just took the square root of both sides. Now, you do the plus and minus, but you don't do the minus here. And so r equals 4. All right, and then you would just graph it. So to graph it, I'm going to, what do you,
First side to center.
Okay, good. You plot the center first. So 3, negative 2. Okay, right here. So put a dot. And then 4 units all the way around, correct? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you just connect the dots. Best you can. All right. So that's the equation. That's the graph of that circle. Okay. Now, what if you had this? I'm not going to graph anymore because I think you can graph these. So I'm just going to go ahead and just find the center and the radius. So number 3, suppose you had x plus 1 squared plus y plus 6 squared equal 36. All right, what do you think the radius, what do you think the center is? -1, -6. Not 1, 6. A lot of students miss that because they see a positive 1 and see a positive 6. But the equation of a circle isn't x plus or y plus, it's what? X minus y minus. That's the equation of a circle. So you got to remember what the equation of a circle looks like. So if you need to rewrite that x plus 1 as x subtract a what? -1, and rewrite the y plus 6 as y minus a -6. Okay? And so therefore x minus h, y minus k. So h is what? Well, k is what? -6. So your center is what? And the radius is just 6. All right. All right, what about number 4, real quick? Number 4, what if we had this? X squared plus y minus 2 squared equal 25. So that x squared throws people off. It will be 0. Very good. So x squared, you have to remember, is the same thing as saying, in parentheses, same thing as saying x minus 0 squared, right? Isn't x minus 0 the same thing as x? Okay. And then plus, and then just rewriting this. All right. So now is it x minus y minus? So therefore, h is 0 and k is 2. So your center is 0, 2, and the radius is 5. So for that one, if you look at 0, 2, where's 0, 2 located? What axis? Not x and y. It's on only one axis. Which one? The y-axis. So 0, 2 is on the y-axis. So that's here, right here. And I go 5 units to the right and so on, correct? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, do the best you can with graphing these. All right. All right, and then finally, suppose we had this. X squared plus y squared equal 36. All right, so the center is 0, 0, and 0, 0 is the origin, remember? 0, 0 is the origin. So if you need to write it out as an x minus h and a y minus k, then go ahead and do that. This is x minus 0 squared plus y minus 0 squared equal 36. All right, so you got to remember that x minus 0 is x. Y minus 0 is y. So x minus h, I found my h. My h is 0. Y minus k, I found my k. K is 0. So the center is 0, 0, which is the origin. And the radius is what? 6. So So when you graph this, the origin. Now the origin is where the x and the y axis intersect. So that's the origin. That's 0, 0. And I go 6 units each way. And just connect them. Okay? All right. Okay. All right, now let's look at this. Okay, so given the equation of a circle, you can determine the center of the radius. That's one of the things you have to be able to do. Given the equation, you can do these, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's on test 2. All right, now, what about this? Huh?
So you always gonna be given the first 12.
Yeah, for the radius, yeah. Now, if I ask you to graph it, okay, if I just did this, that's a good question because on a worksheet I could do this. Now, if I ask you to graph it, I'll make sure it's a perfect square. Okay. What's the center? That part you can do real quick. Tell me quickly what's the center.
3 minus 16.
3, negative 16. Y'all agree?
Yes.
Okay, now remember the radius, r. What does r squared equal? No, what does r squared equal?
The radius square.
28. R squared equals 28. And how do you get r by itself? Okay, so the radius is square root of 28, correct? Now 28 is not a perfect square, but remember you got to do what to this thing?
Find a perfect square.
Simplify. You have to simplify. So what perfect square goes into 28? 4. And so that's square root of 4 times 7. Square root of 7, correct? What's the square root of 4? So the radius is 2 square root of 7?
Yeah.
Right. Now I'm not going to ask you to graph this because you're going to have to estimate 2 square root of 7. Go to your calculator, and that's one of the things I actually do with the distance. Remember you get to approximate? So the radius is approximately equal to what? What's the square root of 28? Do the square root of 28. 5.29. Remember how to do that. This is square root. So on this particular calculator, where do I go to input the square root symbol? Second, x squared, right here. And the square root symbol shows up. And then I punch in what?
28.
Close parentheses and an equal. So 5.29. All right. Okay, so you know how to find the radius if it's not a perfect square. Square root, just like you've been doing. That's one of the reasons why we went over these things last week and the week before, because all these things build upon each other. All right. Now,
Quick question, like a couple class periods ago, we had gotten an answer in a fraction form for a different lesson. How would you, since you have the calculator up, how would you change a fraction to a decimal on the calculator?
how would you change a fraction to a decimal?
I mean, on a calculator.
Well, okay, so you have a fraction. Just say 4 divided by 5. I'm not sure what you're asking me. Just see me after class, okay? All right, just see me after class, because I'm not sure what you're asking me. Because all you do is just punch in 4 divided by 5, and you get your decimal. Just see me after class.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, you hit second and then it turns into a fraction to the decimal. You just hit the second button and then hit the number, hit the PRV. Okay. Oh,
You got it?
I see it, yes.
Okay. All right. I wasn't quite understanding what you. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, now the other part you got to be able to do is if I give you the center and I give you the radius find the equation of a circle. All right, so if I give you the center and the radius, then I want you to find the equation of the circle. Well, first of all, what does the equation of a circle look like? Tell me what it is. X minus h squared plus y minus k squared equal r squared, right? So if the center is given, what does the x coordinate of the center represent in the equation? H. What does the y coordinate of the center represent? K. So it's a good idea to actually label this HK. And then obviously R represents 3, the radius. And so you just plug things back into the formula, right? So you're going to say x minus h, and what's h? 2 squared plus y minus k, and what's k? Nope. Negative 3 squared equal r, and what's r? 3 squared. Don't say r is 9, r is 3. Now 3 squared is what? 9. Okay, now don't leave your answer like this. I expect you to simplify this. So I expect you to tell me that y subtracting negative 3 is what?
Plus 3.
Y what?
Y plus 3.
Y plus 3. So this is your answer. X minus 2 squared plus y plus 3 squared equal 9. All right, so given the center, given the radius, you can write the equation. And so this is number 1. Number 2, let's suppose the center is negative 4, negative 6, and the radius is 2. All right, you're going to write the equation of a circle. Same directions. Find the equation of the circle. So what's h? H is negative 4. What's k? Negative 6. It helps you if you label it. Now you can skip this step right here. A lot of students do. They go from here to the answer. That's fine. For some of you, you may need to write in that step. So if you write in this step, and again, you can skip this, but if you write in that step, you would say x minus a what? Squared plus y minus what? Equals 2 what? Squared. And now you tell me the answer. What's the answer?
X plus 4 squared plus y plus 6 squared equals 4.
Very good. Okay. All right, number 3. Suppose you had the center is 0, negative 5, and the radius is 6. All right, what's h and what's k? H is what? 0. K is negative 5. All right. Now, again, you can skip that step, but be careful with the 0. So in your mind, you're really thinking x subtract what?
0.
Squared plus y subtract what?
Negative 5.
Squared equals 6 what? Okay, I expect you to know, based on what we talked about a while ago, in some of those problems, I expect you to know that x minus 0 squared is just what?
X squared.
X squared. You have to write as x squared. If you don't, if you leave it like this, you can be upset with me because you're not going to get full credit. I expect you to know that x minus 0 squared is x squared. And then I expect you to know that y subtract negative 5 squared is what? Y plus 5 squared. And that's going to equal what? So that's the answer you need to give. Okay? All right. And again, if that was the origin, if the center was the origin based on a while ago, and the radius is 7, then you could tell me the answer right away. What do you think the answer is right away?
X squared.
X squared plus y squared equal? Very good. That's the answer. But if you need to write in that step, you write in the step. This is your h, this is your k. So x minus 0 squared plus y minus 0 squared, right? Equals 7 squared. So what's the answer? X squared plus equal 49. All right, and then one more with this. Suppose I had this. Now remember I forgot his name, but he asked me about, is it always going to be a perfect square? All right, so the question should be, is this always going to be a whole number? Not necessarily. So what if I had this? -2, 5, and r is the square root of 7. Not 7, but what? Square root of 7. Okay, let's see what we get. So what's your h? What's your k? All right, so x subtract a what? Squared. Plus y subtract what? Squared equal, and then the square root of 7, and what do I do to that? Squared. Okay? Remember it's r squared, right? So r is not 7. What's r? Square root of 7. All right, now let's write the answer. X subtract -2 squared is the same thing as x plus 2 squared. This is going to stay what? All right, now let's think about the square root of 7 squared. Remember, the square root of 7 squared means the square root of 7 times what? Square root of 7. What is the square root of 7 times the square root of 7? It's just 7. Square root of 49, which is just what? 7. It's just 7. So if you need to say 7 times 7 is 49, go ahead. What's the square root of 49? So it goes here. 7. 7 goes there. All right, see what you do if r is a square root?
Well, with the square root and the square root, when I do it still, is that the same concept?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So remember when in a previous lesson you had something like square root of x plus 1 equal 3, and you square both sides. Remember that? And the square and the square root undo each other. And you said x plus 1 has to equal what? 9. So x is 8. Same thing here. So you see how we had square root of 7 squared? So the square and the square root undo each other. You're left with what? 7. So the ideas are the same. Okay? All right, so that was that one. All right, now, what about this? Find the center and radius of each. Number 1, x squared plus y squared, that's a y, plus 8x plus 4y plus 16 equal 0. All right, so some of you remember some stuff from the previous course, probably. So remember the equation of a circle is x squared plus y squared equal a radius squared, correct? All right, so if all this was in there, then I don't think this would cause an issue. You would say, and let's say that this was something, now obviously your radius can't be 0 because you would no longer have a circle. Your radius have to have some length, correct? All right, but if all this wasn't there, then what would h be? 0. What would k be? 0. All right, but all this is here. So there's no way I can right away say what this equation is in standard form. I've got to do some work. So you remember completing a square? That's where you use completing the square. So one of the handouts you had on probably last week or the week before was this. So you may want to use this at some point just to help you. Remember, we have more ways to complete the square. So this is a circle. Next week, you're going to look at this part, quadratic functions. So today is circles. Next week is quadratic functions. All right, so here are the steps to completing the square on this. So listen carefully. It's very simple. Okay, so you're going to group the x's together, and you're going to group the y's together. And you're going to bring the constant to the other side. All right, so group the x's together, group the y's together, and bring the constant to the other side. So it's on here if you read this. All right, now x squared and y squared will always have a coefficient of 1, so I wouldn't worry about that part here. So you group the x's together, so let's group the x's together. x squared, plus what do I put next to it? 8x. All right. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do this now. Leave a space here. So remember when we complete the square on a quadratic function, I left a space? Same idea. So you're going to say plus a blank. Now, you don't have to draw the blank. I'm just putting the blank there. I'm just putting the blank there. Okay. And then now we're going to put the y's together. So what are my y's?
Y squared plus 4y.
And then plus a blank. And that's going to equal what's on the other side? Negative 16. Okay? So that's what that's the way you're going to write it, that step. So you're grouping the x together, you're going to group the y's together, and then you bring the constant to the other side. All right, so remember when we complete the square root of quadratic, the whole idea was to make this what kind of trinomial? Do you remember the words? Perfect square trinomial. All right, at least one person remember that. All right, perfect square trinomial. All right, and then remember when you write a perfect square trinomial, that means you can write this as something squared. Remember all that?
Yes.
All right. So remember how to complete the square on this. You take the coefficient of x. And what's the coefficient of x?
8.
8. What do I do to that 8?
Divided.
Divide by 2. And that's going to equal 4, correct? What do I do to that 4? And that's going to equal what? And what do I do to that 16? Add it to both sides. So the 16 goes here, and a 16 goes here. So what you do one side, you have to do to the other. All right. So remember completing the square and quadratic. So you take the coefficient of x, which is 8, divided by 2, you get 4. And what do you do to 4? Square it, you get 16. What do you do to 16? You add it to both sides, just like with a quadratic. All right. In this case, so you can do it twice. Now you have to do the same thing to the y's. What is the coefficient of y? What do I do to that 4? What do I get when divided by 2? What do I do to this 2? What do I get when I square it?
4.
What do I do to this 4?
Add 4 to
Add 4 to both
both sides.
sides. What you do to one side, you do to the other. Okay? All right, now, always go back and make sure these numbers are correct before you go any further. Now, if you're doing this correct, if you complete the square correct, you should now be able to factor these trinomials as a binomial times itself, or something squared. So what do you think this binomial is? Very good. All right, and if you remember, all you do, remember our discussion last week, you take this number here, which is a 4, right? And that's what this is, plus 4. And you can always check yourself. You don't have to, but you can always check yourself. What's x plus 4 times x plus 4? Okay, if you FOIL it, it's x squared. What's the outer? Now, since the binomials are the same, the outer and inner should be the same. So the inner is also 4x. And what's the last? 16. Combine like terms, I get x squared plus 8x plus 16, which is what this was. Okay, now over here, plus, this should also be a binomial squared. What do you think that one is? Y plus 2, right? Again, it's always this number here. Y plus 2. And then that's going to equal, what do I get when I add those three numbers together? 4. So that's your equation of a circle. Now from there, you're going to find the center. What's the center? Very good. What's the radius? 2. All right, so on that worksheet, when you picked up that worksheet, and I think this is part 2 maybe, 1.6 part 2 or part 3, I can't remember which one it is. Not 1.6, 2.8, I'm sorry, 2.8. So it's going to ask you to write the equation of a circle, so this is the equation you're going to write, correct? Then it's going to ask you for the center and the radius. So it's 2.8, I think it's a part 3 or part 2. All right, so it's not difficult. All right, number 2, let's look at another one. All right, remember the steps. Okay, suppose we had x squared plus y squared minus 4x minus 12y minus 9 equal 0. Group the x's together, group the y's together, correct? And then what do I do to that constant? Right. So when I group the x's together, I'm going to say x squared. What do I write next to it? Minus 4x. And then we go ahead and just put the, what do I write next? Plus a blank. It's always plus a blank. Then let's put the y's together. Plus and then your y's. Y squared. What else do I put next to it? Plus a blank, right? And that's going to equal what number? Very good. So when you see right now, you're subtracting 9, the opposite is to add 9, so that's why it's a positive 9. So you add 9 to both sides. Okay, so now we're going to complete the square in the x's, we're going to complete the square in the y's. So we're going to complete the square twice. What is the coefficient of x? Yeah. Now remember when we did the quadratics, when you complete the square, the coefficient of x squared should be what? No, not necessarily positive. Positive what though?
Oh, 1.
1. All right. Now, with the circles, it'll always be a 1. If it wasn't, you would divide everything by that number. But for us, it will be a 1. And the same thing for y squared. Y squared better have what coefficient? 1. All right. So once the x squared and y squared are coefficient of 1s, then I take the coefficient of x. What's the coefficient of x? Nope, not 4. Negative 4. What do I do to that negative 4? And what do I get when divided by 2? Okay. All right. Now, what do I do with that negative 2? I square it. And what do I get when I square it? Okay. So now what do I add to both sides? 4. Plus 4 plus 4 to both sides. What you do one side, you do to the other. So remember, you take the coefficient of x, which is negative 4. Now the negative is going to be important if you do what I'm about to do. And then you divide, you get negative 2, then you square it, you get 4. And here's why it's going to be important. Remember, the next step here would be to factor it. And then some of you still have a little issue with factoring this. You shouldn't, because these are easy to factor right here, because the coefficient of x squared is 1. But basically, you take this number right here, and that's what you put here. So you have to make sure you wrote this number correctly. So it's a negative 2, correct? Yeah. So this should be x what? Minus 2. Negative 2, negative 2. So if you had written this as 4 plus 2, you probably would have not been very careful and said x plus 2, and it's not because of that middle sign. The middle sign's negative. All right. Now let's go to the next one. What's the coefficient of y? What do I do to that negative 12? What do I get when divided by 2? What do I do to negative 6? What do I get? What do I do to 36? Okay. And then finally, what's this right here? Y minus 6. Yeah, you put an x, you'll be upset with me because I'll take some points away. Right. And then on the other side, what do you get when you add up all those numbers? 49? All right, so there's the equation of the circle. That's the equation of the circle. And from there, I can determine the center. What's the center? 2, 6. What's the radius? 7. All right. Number 3. All right, suppose I had this equation. Let's suppose we had x squared plus y squared minus 6y minus 7 equals 0. Right, you put all the x's together, put all the y's together, correct? Okay. Okay, there's only one term with an x squared, so just leave it alone. So it'll be x squared, correct? All right. And then plus. Now be a little bit careful. Remember how in the past, in the previous two, we put the x's together and we said plus a blank? Don't do plus a blank here, because I don't need to complete the square in the x's. I don't need to complete the square in the x's. Because the only term that has an x in is this one. It's x squared. Remember, the only reason to complete the square on the x's is so that way we can factor it as a binomial squared, right? All agree?
Yeah.
Well, all I have is x squared. Can I write this as a binomial squared? Yes. What is it?
X plus 0.
Say x what? Minus 0 squared. So I don't have to compute the e squared and the x's because it's already written as a binomial squared. What's your question?
You don't want us to write it like that though, right? And then finish by the x minus.
No. I'll show you what it's supposed to look like. But in your mind, that's what you have. You have x minus 0 squared. Now, so y'all agree I did not have to complete the square in the x's?
Yeah.
Do I need to complete the square in the y's? Yes. Because I have two terms. And then plus a blank, and what goes on the other side though? 7. Okay, so all I need to do is complete the square in the y's. All right, so what's the coefficient of y? What do I do to it? Get negative 3. What do I do to negative 3? What do I get? And then what do I do to this 9? Okay. So now this should be a perfect square trinomial. So plus what's going to be that binomial? Y minus 3. And what does that equal? 16. All right, now your answer though, see I need for you to rewrite this, so I don't leave it like this. Now if you left it like this, I won't be too upset, but I'd prefer you remember that x minus 0 squared is just what? X squared. Now plus y minus 3 squared equal 16. Okay? All right. And so what's the center? What's the radius? 4. All right, let's do one more with this. Let's suppose we had, let's see. Okay, so I'm making this up. X squared plus y squared minus 8x plus 2 equal 0. All right. So how do you write in the next step? Okay, so x squared. Now I do have to complete the square in the x's though, right? Okay, plus a blank plus equal negative 2. Do I need to complete the square in the y's? No. Okay, so what goes into this blank? So I take the coefficient of x, which is negative 8, I divide by 2, and I get negative 4. And what do I do negative 4? And I get, all right, and what do I add 16? All right, so what is this perfect square right here? X minus what? 4. Plus, and then it's just y squared, correct? Equal 14. So there's your equation. All agree? Based on that, what's the center? What's the radius? Square root of 14. Can I simplify the square root of 14? Yes? No, that decimal is not simplified. Can I simplify the square root of 14? No. Right as a decimal does not simplify. When I say simplify the square root of 14, I'm asking, is our perfect square that goes into 14 other than 1? No. Okay. All right. So that's it. That's completing the square from the circles. So I think you should now be able to do those worksheets from section 2.8. Not difficult. Just practice. Okay.